Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Now this video is a bit of a mashup. I wanted to touch on the weigh-in for Jarrell Miller and Thomas Adamek, simply for the fact Miller has weighed in at a career heaviest by a long distance, 317 pounds. More on that soon. And I'm also going to touch on Daniel Dubois' fight with Kevin Johnson, which on paper shapes as his toughest test to date in his career. He's currently 8-0. Johnson his ninth opponent, and it does look like it will be a slight step up, and it's going to draw some comparisons with Anthony Joshua, someone who Joshua fought when he was on the come up, and Joshua was the first guy to stop Kevin Johnson. So a little bit of pressure on Dubois to do the same, to look good and to come through that one unscathed and really looking dominant, but I'll come to that shortly. Okay, so Miller. First off, I actually wasn't going to do another video on this Jarrell Miller and Thomas Adamek fight, simply for the reason that there doesn't really seem to be a lot of interest in that fight. There has been a little bit of interest growing, but in terms of the fight itself, a lot of people actually see this as a complete mismatch. Thomas Adamek, over 40 now. Jarrell Miller, he's tapered off an opponent's, cherry-picked Adamek, and that's what it is. It's a blatant cherry-pick. He had the option to fight in an IBF final eliminator, didn't want to go to Bulgaria, griped about the money. He's turned down call-outs all over the show, signed a deal with DAZN, 2-fight deal, and he picks Thomas Adamek for his first fight. And now he's telling anyone that will listen that he wants the WBA regular title, and unless he gets that fight, he won't be fighting anyone else. So that is his goal right now. So this is a stay busy of sorts. But he's weighed in 317 pounds. Jesus, 317 pounds. Now this is absolutely crazy. For a guy that's 6'4", 317 pounds. Sure, Miller doesn't look sloppy fat or anything like that, but I'd note that his boxer shorts, which have an elastic waistband, and his pants, when he's actually coming up to the scales and afterwards face-offs and all that sort of stuff, seems to be fight by fight. Those boxer shorts and his pants seem to be getting higher and higher, sort of covering the bottom of his stomach. Maybe that is a deliberate move here. But I think 317 pounds, geez, that's 12.5 pounds heavier than his previous heaviest weight, which was 304 pounds, 304.5 pounds, against Johann Dubois earlier this year. Previously, he's weighed in the high 290s. That was sort of his high watermark for a number of fights. His fight against Marius Wok, which was towards the end of last year, he came in at 283 pounds. So just in the space of a year, that's about 35 pounds that he's weighing heavier. He said after that Wok fight that he felt weak, that he didn't feel the same. And then subsequently he came in at 304.5 pounds for Dubois. And he looked okay in that fight. Dubois put up a fight for about 6 rounds and then Miller sort of dominated the rest of the fight. But he didn't get a stoppage. And a lot of people are quite down on Jarrell Miller right now because his opposition seems to have, as he's got closer to the top, it's just tapered off. So he went for Gerald Washington, Marius Wok, Johann Dubois. They're all about the same level. Sort of top 30-ish. All guys that are on the slide in their career. They're not as good as they once were. They've come off losses in title shots, some time before they fought Miller, 6 months in terms of Gerald Washington's case. But they were all on the slide. But Miller, he seems to like to take on these opponents. That's his fodder. And he hasn't taken that next step. And he could have against Kumrat Pulev, but he didn't want that work in Bulgaria, and he turned his back on that fight. And that would have secured him the IBF mandatory spot to Anthony Joshua's IBF belt. But he didn't want that work. He's subsequently been turning down other call-outs by the likes of Joe Joyce, Dillian White, Andy Ruiz Jr. Then he cherry-picked, and that's what it was, let's not mince words, he cherry-picked Thomas Adamek for a stay-busy fight on this Chicago card. It's the first event for DAZN in the United States, the first Eddie Hearn promoted show on US soil for DAZN, and Miller cherry-picked Thomas Adamek. There hasn't been a lot of interest in this fight. That was the reason I was only going to do one video, because there didn't seem to be the demand for coverage. And why? Because it is a mismatch. It's a cherry-pick. Miller is expected to come through this, and Miller himself has been making all sorts of jokes about Adamek, who's over 40. Adamek has not been relevant in the division for about 5 years now. hasn't really had any notable top-tier wins for quite some time. Sure, he was very good at light heavyweight, and he was also good at cruiserweight, but he hasn't quite been the heavyweight that certainly Eddie Hearn, Miller's promoters, and a few others have been making him out to be. They've been calling Thomas Adamek a legend. That's the way that they've tried to sell this fight to fans, and it hasn't been working. And we've actually seen Miller's slot on the card. He was going to effectively be in a chief support type role, but he's been bumped down the card to the opening of the TV viewing. So that in itself says how much interest is in this fight. It's a cherry pick. And Miller's weighing 317 pounds. That's absolutely crazy. He's going to get found out at the top level weighing 317 pounds. Sure, a lot of people like to say, oh, Jarrell Miller's got a great engine, great motor. But against a real mover, he's going to have some issues, I think. If someone can move, slip punches, they could make Miller look a bit silly at that weight. If Jarrell Miller was 250, 260, 270, I might think a bit different. And it was only actually a few years ago, he was weighing 245 pounds. You can go check it out. On the website for Greg Cohen's website, it actually has Miller listed at 245. Clearly it's out of date by 2 or 3 years. But Miller has shown he can be that weight. Some of this where he sort of says he feels comfortable with the heavier weight, I'm not buying it. He's obviously actually got trouble maintaining his weight. And at 317 pounds, he can tell us whatever he likes. At the top level, when he actually does face someone of note, it's going to be an issue. Will it be an issue against Thomas Adamek? Probably not. Miller said he won't be doing any overtime in this fight. He wants to get a knockout, look spectacular. But the thing is, he's not going to get a huge amount of credit for this fight because it is a cherry pick. And then he's going to call out Anthony G-String Joshua, as he says. And he's going to call out other people and say what a bad man he is. And we're not going to believe it because he isn't fighting the guys that he should be. Jarrell Miller ran over 317 pounds. Okay, Daniel Dubois is taking on Kevin Johnson, the much-hyped 8-0 prospect. He's in the ring in what does shape to be his toughest fight of his brief career. It's in the form of former title challenger Kevin Johnson. The fight's taking place in Leicester. It's on a Frank Warren card. Actually, Nathan Gorman, he was due to be on the card, but he's had to pull out because his opponent pulled out. But the opponent, it was listed as TBA, so who knows who it was actually. So he's not going to be on the card, and it wouldn't have been anyone good, by the way, if it was, this late in the piece anyway. Dubois is 21. He's 8-0, as I mentioned, and he's probably about 2 years away from being where he needs to be in terms of the top of the division. He's got a lot of learning to do. He's quite green, didn't have a huge amateur background, and he's just working through the levels slowly at the moment. And because he is so young, and he didn't have a lot of experience coming up, I actually think that's fine. And Johnson, he does, even though he's completely rinsed, he hasn't been a factor for years. This is a step up of sorts. Johnson is durable. He's only been knocked out a couple of times, or stopped a couple of times, should I say. Anthony Joshua stopped him, and also recently Peter Milas, and that was because of cuts. But in terms of Frank Warren, he's penned a piece, and I'll just quickly go through it. Another young star on a stacked card of meaningful fights is our top young heavyweight Daniel Dubois, who's stepping up again against the hugely experienced American Kevin Johnson. The former world title challenger has been in with them all over the years. The likes of Vitaly Klitschko, Tyson Fury, Christian Hammer, Derek Chisora, Manuel Cha, Anthony Joshua, Kubrat Pulev, and most recently Andy Ruiz Jr. And I'll just note, he lost all those fights, so mentioning that, yeah, sure he's been in with them, but he is clearly a journeyman now and he's out for paydays. That's what Kevin Johnson is right now. He is a high-level journeyman or mid-level journeyman. Out of all those established fighters, the heavyweight division, only Joshua recorded a stoppage win over Johnson. So he represents an ideal test for Daniel in just his 9th professional fight. So that's what they're looking for here. Dubois coming through the ranks, a lot of hype. He was on the ESPN top list of prospects for 2017. Blue chip prospect, regarded highly by many. They are now starting to build the Anthony Joshua comparisons just that little bit more brick by brick. Kevin Johnson, he was stopped in, was it 2 or 3 rounds by Joshua? So if Dubois can come in, do the same, even though the fight's 2 or 3 years removed from Joshua having fought Johnson, But if Dubois can do something similar, then obviously the comparison builds. The comparison between him and Joshua, people will say, actually, yeah, Dubois, he looks pretty good. Frank Warren continues, experience is the key here, and that's what he needs more of, which is why his trip over to Russia to spar with Alexander Povetkin was so valuable for him. We know that he gave more than a good account of himself over there, and working with such a seasoned campaign, it will have done him the world of good. At this stage of his career, work accomplished in the gym against sparring partners with many more miles on the clock than himself is probably just as crucial to his progress as rounds under the lights. And with that, I completely agree. He would have got a lot out of sparring guys like Alexander Povetkin and some of the other prospects that he was in with. Dubois, only 21, doesn't have a huge amount of experience. If he can get some miles in the gym, get some good experience, learn some valuable lessons, know what to do when he's under pressure, it's going to help. And some of these things, if he's not getting the time in the ring, because remember, he's been knocking out most of his opponents in, 1, 2, 3 rounds. He isn't getting a lot of valuable experience in the ring beyond getting a KO. Sure, he's putting some things to the test, but ultimately his right hand has been doing some damage, getting guys out of there. So I guess they'll be hoping potentially that Johnson can take him at least a few rounds, but I do like this little step up in Kevin Johnson because he is a tougher task, at least on paper, than some of these other sort of stiffs that he has been facing. And he needs to be in with some guys that are a bit more durable, that can take him some rounds so he can get some valuable experience. But I guess he's also getting some valuable experience in the gym too, with sparring, going out to Russia and all that. But I'm looking forward to that fight to sort of see what's happening with Dubois, his development. And he's actually been in sort of the gym with Lennox Lewis as well. And I don't want to sort of dwell on this for too much because it was effectively paid for by a gambling company. Lewis was in there giving Dubois some tips, even though it was sort of set up by a gambling website, all that sort of stuff. Those sessions and that time that he spent with Lewis, I'm sure it was valuable. And if he continues to make adjustments, add new things to his arsenal, put another string to his bow, it's only going to be good for him. And I'm sure he's trying to execute some new things in the gym, sort of build on his repertoire. And slowly, I'm sure that we'll see it executed in the ring. But some of the opponents he's faced, they weren't the opponents to sort of see that stuff. But it'll be interesting to see how he looks. A lot of people have been saying Dubois looks a little bit slow, maybe not as quick on his feet as he could be. Some of his punches in terms of the speed of them, maybe not as fast as people would like to see. But I've still got high hopes that, this guy is going to go far in the division. We'll have to see. Obviously, some of these guys you don't really know for a couple of years. But at the moment, he's been sort of passing every test that's been thrown at him. It'll be interesting to see what happens against Johnson, because if he knocks him out and it's early on, say first round, well, the buzz will keep growing and the comparisons with Anthony Joshua will build. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Drop a comment on Jarrell Miller's weight. How ridiculous is that? 317 pounds. I'm out.